Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where in the world you're joining us from. Hopefully you'll be able to see my camera. Hopefully you're able to see me. I'm just going to very quickly introduce the panelists as well as give you some introductions and explain some things about the webinar. And then I'm going to give the floor to our speakers. So this is our first science and research seminar. This was put together by the research team at Cochlear Latin America. Bianca, I am the research manager for Cochlear Latin America. Just for you to know, we have 706 people who are attending this webinar. And for us, it is a huge success. So first and foremost, I would like to thank everyone who signed up. I also would like to thank our speakers, mainly for accepting our invitation to talk about such a wonderful cutting-edge topic. And also, I would like to give thanks to all the Cochlear teams for putting together this event. In order for us to put together this event, there's a lot of people backstage working to make it happen, from the commercial area, etc. So there is a big team working on it. So thank you very much to all of you who are attending, to all of the speakers, and to the entire Cochlear team. And all of this is related with innovation. I'm not gonna start by the last Cochlear mission because research is about innovation. When we innovate, and when we offer people new things that can improve or change their lives, we empower them and we transform them. So I believe that the basic principle of innovation is empowering and transforming the lives of people. And that is our mission as Cochlear. Very quickly, I'm going to show you a disclaimer. We have to do that as per corporate legal obligation. This entire seminar will be recorded for those of you who weren't able to join us today. And here, I'll give you some insights regarding the platform. You should be looking at a screen similar to this with my face there. We have audio instructions here. If you are hearing this presentation very well, please do not change anything. The platform in Spanish, you should have documents. We have uploaded 4 documents. We have amongst them instructions to access translation options. So if you need a translation into Portuguese, into Spanish, or into English, please download the instructions to do so. And lastly, as the opponents talk, if you have questions, please type them in the chat window. And at the end of the session, we're going to have a space to answer those questions and to discuss the presentations. In order for this screen to not remain open all the time, you can click the red arrow, and then this screen will be minimized, or maybe click this slightly larger box, and this presentation screen will be displayed full screen. If you want to take a picture, I will give you 5 seconds to do so. Here are the instructions for translation services. Again, please take a picture of this screen because I will pass this slide. Here you will find all of the instructions to access translation services. So you can print screen, do a screen grab, or maybe take a picture of this screen. If you need simultaneous interpretation services, either in English, Spanish, or Portuguese. Depending on the country you're joining us from, that's the number you have to dial. If you're joining us from Brazil or from Portugal, you have to dial this number. There are 2 different numbers for Portugal as well as for Brazil. While you do this, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Federico Di Lela. Federico Di Lela will be our monitor at the seminar, and he will be moderating this presentation from here onward. He's the interim chief at the Italian hospital. He's graduated from the Ear and Nose Doctor Society in Argentina. And luckily for us, he's the chief researcher at Cochlear Latin America. He's part of our team now. Fede, you have the floor. I will turn off my camera now. I will leave the screen up. And that's it. Can you hear me, doctor? Can you? All right, I'll turn off my camera. You can turn yours on, and we should be able to hear you. I'm gonna leave mine on actually until you leave yours, until you turn yours on. I think Federico's having some internet issues, so if we can continue. All right, perfect. So I'll continue. I'll continue because the presentation was the same anyway. Fede, if anything, once you get back, please interrupt me. Anyway, Federico was going to explicitly state the goals of the seminar. Now, it's very difficult to look for a topic, a value-adding, differentiating topic, because everyone is talking about COVID this day and age. So we were thinking of different topic ideas, you know, what we could talk about. So we got this idea. We have the idea and the purpose of having 3 more seminars with new and fresh topics revolving around a specific overarching topic, which is research cutting edge. So we want to discuss things that could encourage us to change the lives of people, as well as share knowledge on this specific topic. Also, this is a great opportunity to network and to encourage debate amongst the people, not only amongst the speakers, but also to give the possibility for the participants to participate via chat, via questions, and contribute to the continuous professional development of all of our customers or even non-customers in our industry, right? This seminar in particular will be facilitated by key opinion leaders on the topic. As you know, these people are at the forefront on vestibular implants. Now, vestibular implants are hardly ever discussed, so we hope to get the ball rolling on that. We're gonna talk about that for the next hour and a half. Now, this is my request to all of the panelists. Please stick to the time you were given. Please try as much as you can to stick to your time limitations. Okay. Fede, are you in? Yes. I'm sorry. I got it. My internet dropped out, and you know, just at that moment. So you know how it is. Okay, no problem. Please walk us through the agenda and introduce us to the presenters. I will now shut off my microphone and my camera. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Bianca. Good morning, good afternoon to all our attendees. And thank you very much to all of the panelists who accepted this invitation on behalf of Cochlear Latin America and on behalf of the Buenos Aires Hospital. It's a pleasure for me to welcome you to the symposium. I would like to especially thank our foreign panelists who have graciously accepted our invitation to participate in this very interesting and refreshing topic, which has been increasing in popularity during recent years, and it is now a topic of interest in events around the world. Professor Bosio, who's the coordinator of our implant teams, came up with the idea for this topic. And so we decided to set up a symposium around it. So it fills me with pride, you know, and it goes to show you that it was the right choice to talk about this topic based on the number of attendees. Very quickly, we're going to go over our agenda today. We're going to introduce our panelist. Professor Bosio will introduce a panelist, the person sitting next to me. Then we will have a very interesting presentation about a review on vestibular systems, the evolution of vestibular systems in the animal scale, its relevance, and the faults representing the vestibular system in our organism. Then Professor Nuri from Turkey will talk to us about the need to stimulate the vestibule, why it is necessary to have vestibular stimulation. Then Dr. will talk to us about the basis and the mechanisms for autolytic vestibular stimulation. They have actually patented a stimulation system, as we will learn in their presentation. Then we will have Professor Angel Ramos, who will talk to us about vestibular stimulation. He's going to tell us about his experience in this topic. And then we will have some Q&A sessions. We will have some final considerations, conclusions, and then Bianca will close us off. And that is how the symposium will wrap up. I will now give the floor to Professor Bosio. Bianca, please go to the next slide. Professor Carlos Bosio is professor at the University of Buenos Aires. He's the CEO of the Otorrinolaringóloga Argentina Foundation, and he's also the coordinator of the Cochlear Implant program at the Italian Hospital of Buenos Aires. Go to the next one, Bianca. All right, so in the meantime, to me, it's truly an honor to participate in these types of seminars. I would like to thank Federico for his collaboration and for his support, as well as Cochlear support provided by Cochlear Corporation in Latin America to carry out this initiative, as well as the trust and the generosity of our international speakers, who are great speakers. They're excellent presenters in all of the events we attended. And so it's an honor to share this space with them. So this is the program. Federico already walked us through the program. One more. So very briefly, I wanted to take a couple of minutes to share with you some concerns regarding this pathology and some treatment options, some therapy options as well. I wanted to tell you, as you all very well know, the prevalence of the bilateral vestibular hypofunction is 28 cases every 100,000 adults. This is according to figures reported in 2018. But what's more important is not just about the volume, but that 56% of these patients reported cutting back on their participation in social events as a result of the consequences of this condition. And what's worse, 58% of those patients reported having difficulties with daily, everyday activities. So this condition clearly compromises their lives, their performance in their social and family lives. Also, there's a risk of falling down in the patients of this pathology. A larger proportion than general population, and these patients can have up to 19 falls per year. Falling down to the floor, I mean, losing balance and falling down. Most of the people falling down are patients older than 65 years of age, and this is related with environmental factors, also muscle weakness, but also balance disorders, which is why it is very important for us to consider all of these affections. Now, balance disorders are related with low scores on quality of life, and here it is clearly expressed 0.39 over 0.34, which is the control group in this index that you can see here. Bianca, let's go to the next one. Now, regarding the economic impact, which is very important in this day and age, there are expenses directly connected with this condition on doctor visits, and also work absenteeism. The cost is approximately $13,000 per year, and this is not taking into account the costs related to rehabilitating these patients. the health costs associated to potentially fatal falls, or at least injuring falls in the United States. Back in 2015, it was reported at 50 billion dollars. So this is a huge impact on the health systems in any country around the world. There is a study back in 2009 which calculated that the average cost associated to falls and the cost for the health system is around 675.4 million euros per year, with an average of almost 10,000 euros per fall. If we look into this pathology in the context of other chronic diseases, other debilitating diseases such as kidney failure, deep bilateral hypoacusia, osteoarthritis, if we put it in this context, we will find that any intervention under $50,000, the life quality scale is highly cost effective. And we can see also that cochlear implants are around 16,000. Hip prosthetics, you can see the figures here. Now, this goes to show you that these types of devices and these types of therapies are around $30,000 and $50,000, meaning that their cost is $30,000 to $50,000. So we can see the cost effectiveness of preventing these conditions. And lastly, I wanted to acknowledge people like Balsan de la Santina and others who have worked heavily on this, as well as our speakers today. I wanted to acknowledge your work on solving these problems together with our surgeons and together with our patients. Well, thank you very much. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Marina Rosende. She's the chief of the Autoneurology division at the Italian hospital. Marina was a colleague of mine at residency, and she fell in love with vestibular care. She's also a great teacher, so you will really enjoy this presentation, I'm pretty sure. Go ahead, Marina. The floor is yours. Well, thank you very much. I'm just gonna, well, before starting my presentation, I would like to thank Dr. Carlos Bossi and Dr. Federico Vilera for their invitation, as well as Dr. Angel Ramos de Miguel, Angel Ramos Macia, and Dr. Nuri Osgergen. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your last name, for inviting me to the seminar. So I'm going to introduce you to the vestibular apparatus. If you have a reductionist or simplistic view, you could say that the vestibular apparatus, it's just the balance apparatus. However, the sense of balance is our unknown sense, meaning that we acknowledge its existence only when we're under pathological conditions. Now, I really like this definition by Werner Graf on the evolution of the vestibular system. It's a wonderful structure, very complex structure. It is an engineered structure. It is the size of an almond, and it contains 5 high accuracy, high sensitivity organs. Now, if you talk about evolutionary terms, it is believed that the aestheticist is the oldest balance organ, which hails back to 250 million years back. And it was present in water-faring invertebrates. It was a static sensor. It was sort of like a very simple sac with dense crystals inside of it. Now, in this work, you can see the morphologic diversity, the complexity levels that these organs had, both in number as well as location, and their relations with ciliary cells. And all they did was providing information about the displacement of the animal underwater. Then we had morphological changes believed to be a result of adaptation to the environment. And then we started seeing semicircular channels. We have the first semicircular channel, which had a common macula and two sensory epithels. And later on, with evolution, they became the crests of the anterior and posterior channels. Then we have a second semicircular channel, and lastly, we have a third semicircular channel. Many millions of years went by, and what we had after that were fossil remains, reconstructed fossil remains showing us this evolution. Out of these vertebrates that have no jaw, we have the two semicircular channels, the vertical semicircular channels joined by a common crosses, joined by the gallispid. And then millions of years later, you can see in these fossil remains belonging to vertebrates with the jaw, how a third semicircular channel appears, the horizontal one. Also, from this common pacula and from the formations of ilforamen remains, we have the utricle and the saccule, meaning that this gravistatic sensor turned eventually into this wonder of nature. It's a gravitational sensor of angular and linear acceleration. And then we had the cochlea. But since evolution is not always a synonym of growth, we can see that in the first cetaceans evolving from terrestrial quadrupeds, we can see how their semicircular channels slowly devolved in size. The hypothesis is that this size modification was due to a point of no return in the cetacean evolution, which led to a total independence of these animals to life on land. Now, let's discuss the vestibular apparatus functions. This apparatus does many different things. It controls balance, it optimizes the accuracy of our vision, and it aligns them with the movements of the head. It detects our own movement and our sense of spatial orientation. And it can also perform other functions related with blood pressure regulation, which is why unilateral vestibular failures and in a higher degree bilateral have an impact on the lives of our patients. And it is not yet well known in some medical environments. So what happens under normal conditions? There is an absence of vestibular sensation, and that is one of the main characteristics of this sensorial system. For this to happen, what do we need? They asked me to explain the physiology of the labyrinth in 1 minute. So I took the liberty to come up with this graph. What do we need? We need a stimulus, a cephalic movement creating angular acceleration or linear acceleration, but in reality, most of our movements are a mix of both. Then we have a group of sensory organs present in the labyrinth, which are capable of sensing these accelerations as well as the force of gravity. One functional unit, which is the ciliary cells, which are the basic element of mechanical translation, capturing the moments of the endolymph to the ciliary crest, and it undergoes certain changes in the tone of cell discharge with an increase in a decrease of neurotransmitters. In other words, we will need a push-pull system. This means that we will always have a cell group where we will have an increase in their activity, an increase in their depolarization, and another cell group where the opposite will happen. We'll have a decrease and inhibition. All of this through brain connections with vestibular nuclei, and from then the oculomotor nuclei, the cerebellum, and the brain cortex will allow our central nervous system to know which movements we are performing. And from that point on, you will see two results. One, the production of the vestibulocular reflex, which will maintain the picture we are seeing on the retina, meaning that we turn our heads our eyes will perform the same movement at the same speed, at the same amplitude, but in the complete opposite direction. And another one, which is the vestibular spinal reflex, which will maintain our upright position so that we don't fall down. And it also stabilizes our heads in relation to the torso. But when we have a noxa damaging the vestibular apparatus because of known or unknown causes, then we will lose these reflexes, or these reflexes will be severely compromised, giving way to two symptoms, synapsia and instability. That is how we come to bilateral vestibulopathy, which is a chronic condition. I like this last definition because I think it's a very complete. This definition reads, the reduced function of vestibular organs, vestibular nerves, or a combination of both. 50% approximately are idiopathic origins. Other causes could be allotoxins, such as aminoglycosides, infections such as meningitis, autoimmune diseases, and bilateral nerve disease. In general terms, evolution is low and progressive in some patients, with some exceptions. So we have to remember that our patients older than 60 or 65, that the initial kickoff for a bilateral vestibulopathy could be the presbyvestibulopathy. Now, if we talk about figures, the diagnosis age is between 50 and 60 years of age, meaning that we're not talking about strictly old patients. 90% of them claim that their quality of life is affected. And the estimation is that there are 3 million patients in the world suffering from this condition. The symptom spectrum is really broad. The most frequent symptoms are a lack of stability, which worsens in situations such as stepping on irregular floors or walking in darkness. Those are big fall down predictors. And also the frequent fallings creates a lot of social lack of confidence. They often require canes or other such aids to walk, and they oftentimes need another person to go with them. They have to adapt their homes. And if there are other worse conditions, such as visual disorders or neuropathy, then the condition can really worsen. Also, if we're talking about an elderly patient, it's worse. Synapsia, which is the difficulty to read and recognize faces when we walk, alterations in spatial navigation, and allopathy. All of this means that this spectrum of symptoms creates a social and economical environment, as well as a psychological one. These are patients who have lost their autonomy and therefore are in a situation of disability. Medical treatments and vestibular rehabilitation aren't effective enough to restore vestibular function. According to Daniel Kahneman, an individual has a specific amount of available resources to allot to mental tasks. And when there's a bilateral vestibular dysfunction, we increase the amount of cognitive resources we have to use, meaning that we have lower cognitive capabilities available for other tasks. And that creates a lot of tiredness. There is a lot of literature discussing the impact of this condition on patients. It says that 56% of them reported decrease in their social activity, and 58% of them reported decreases in their daily activities. 67% have reported falls, and a fourth of them actually sustained injuries as a result of those falls. More than 8% of the patients perceive that their quality of lives has decreased severely or moderately. Others say that work-related losses is significant compared to those who have lost only one vestibule versus those patients who have no damage on those labyrinths. There's other work where they interviewed 18 patients and they looked into what were some of the physical, cognitive, and emotional symptoms, concluded that all of the patients concluded that they had to perform tasks slower, paying more attention with more focus, or avoiding them altogether. Meaning that, in other words, the symptom spectrum is really broad. It ranges from the cognitive, the physical, and the emotional. So the goal of this research that our colleagues will guide us through on the vestibular area is about developing a system that is artificially able to restore vestibular function. And maybe in some years, we'll be able to add this last link of the chain to the evolution, where we can see vestibular implants as part of evolution. This is the bibliography that I used for my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Marina. It's very clear that the vestibular system is a very important system, and when it fails, it absolutely represents a significant decrease in life quality, and that also makes it necessary for us to have a cost-benefit calculation that we have to perform. We're going to continue. Bianca, if you please welcome our next guest. Let's just go to the next presentation, please. Excellent. We're going to be introducing Professor Nuri Osgergen from Turkey. He is the CEO of the Otology Society and Neurotology Society of Turkey. He is the CEO of the Meanings and Scientific Activities Group. He also is the chair of the European Academy of the Otology, and he is the founder of the Turkish. So we're clearly going to hear from an expert on this matter. So it's a pleasure for us to introduce him, and we're really thankful for Dr. Osgergen for having accepted this invitation. Professor Nuri, you have the floor.
We can't hear you, Doctor.
Okay, now, okay. It's
now,
open now.
perfect, perfect.
Hello. Okay. I'm going to talk about the electrical stimulation of the vestibular system now. The vestibular apparatus consists the angular and linear acceleration components of head movements. These indeed belongs to the semicircular canals, and otoliths are stimulated with these stimulations. And the auricular macula and the saccular macula have also specific vestibular spinal and oculomotor projections. And auricular macula has stronger projections to the oculomotor system than the saccular macula. So it is much more important for the auricular one. The auricular and saccular macula are placed approximately perpendicular to each other. And the saccule and auricule respond to the linear acceleration and the gravity. You can see the saccule senses in the sagittal plane, and the auricle senses in the horizontal plane. So these are important for the vestibulocular reflex and also for the function of the vestibular system. Visual stabilization is very much important in maintaining our equilibrium. The main factor that performs this visual stimulation is the vestibulocular reflex. And the main part of the vestibulocular reflex is the optic fixation. This is the major part of our stabilization of our equilibrium. So you can look and focus on this wave server that he can be in equilibrium in this unfavorable circumstances and the platform. But as long as he fixes the eye on a point, this comes and stimulates the brain to be in equilibrium. Of course, the other parts of the body also contribute for this. Or for vestibular spinal reflex, of course, this is connected with the flexibility and the motion range and the muscle strength, as you can see in this girl, and also gaze. But still, the girl fixates her eyes on a point to initiate, also to be contributed by the equilibrium, to be contributed by the vestibulocular reflex. So vestibulocular reflex, vestibular spinal reflex, or vestibulocular reflexes are three main mechanisms keeping our equilibrium steady. Let's talk about vestibulocular reflex, because this is much important than the other two. The vestibulocular reflex stabilizes the gaze above two heads and enables the clear vision. This means that the vestibulocular reflex is stimulated with higher frequencies of stimulation, and so we can conclude that for clear vision, eye movements should compensate the head movements. So let's translate it on the other way, that if there is a vestibular disorder or vestibular failure, then one cannot read book while standing or while walking, because the vestibulocular reflex has failed, and then the connections among the systems are also interrupted, disconnected. The vestibular nerve fires spontaneously at a rate of 90 action per second in the absence of the movement, but it is modulated by head movements, and this increases or decreases about 0.5 action potential per second per degree of rotation of the head in one direction to the other. So the vestibular nerve is that much important by firing the vestibular responses, and the angular vestibulocular reflex and the translational vestibulocular reflexes induce eye movements to compensate head rotation and translation to stabilize the gaze direction. Indeed, this is the vestibulocular reflex, and this is very easily examined by head impulse test. So, as mentioned, these two, the vestibulocular reflex relies on the higher frequencies of stimulation. This is 2 to 6 hertz, and this is our daily life, because while walking, while running, and doing our work, the vestibular apparatus, vestibular system is always stimulated with higher frequencies, and for the lower frequencies, 0 to 2 hertz, it was, of course, a matter of discussion until we really understood the vestibulocular reflex. Vestibulocular reflex is the main function of the intact vestibular system. And the vestibular nuclei and vestibulocular pathways and the oculomotor neurons also, of course, contribute to this vestibulocular reflex. So, what happens with the failure? Failures such as following vestibular neuronitis or labyrinthectomy or ototoxicity by a systemic medication like gentamicin or any kind of aminoglycosides or vestibular directomy, what happens? Vestibular diseases can lead to bilateral loss of vestibular function. Of course, the bilateral loss of vestibular function is something quite annoying because with the unilateral vestibular failure, it can be compensated by several methods, including the vestibular rehabilitation. But the vestibular rehabilitation methodology is almost always fails to completely overcome the bilaterally involved cases. So degraded visual acuity during head movements and postural imbalance and vertigo appears, and of course oscillopsia during walking or in motion. A sudden loss of this rest activity causes important static and dynamic vestibulocular reflex failure. And so we can tell that failure of vestibular reflexes often result from hair cell injury and apoptosis. For bilateral loss of vestibular function, it is about, as already mentioned, the prevalence is in between 16 to 28 cases per 100,000, and also, of course, it is important in the elderly. And what happens with the bilateral vestibular loss is the chronic imbalance, blurred vision in dynamic conditions. This also means that oscillopsia, fear of falling, and having difficulties reading signs and recognizing faces when they are walking. This is also part of cognitives, because the cognitives are also failed in these instances. The patients feel ashamed to be seen in public because many people think that they are drunk. And of course, emotions, memories, and personal changes come out. And as mentioned, bilateral vestibular loss cannot be compensated, and sensory substitution is insufficient by vestibular customized vestibular rehabilitation techniques. And so what needed for this problem to be overcome comes with the electrical stimulation. Can the vestibular system be electrically stimulated? Of course, there has been several studies and researches coming during the last maybe the 50 to 60 years. And if we make a resume of this, electrical stimulation both activates the receptors and primary afferents, as mentioned by in 20s and 2016 and 2019. And it activates afferents from all vestibular regions. And irregular afferents of the transient system have a lower average threshold than regular afferents of the sustained system. And when ampullary nerves were electrically stimulated, and the consistent eye rotations in the canal plane were achieved and partially modulated. So this initiated and encouraged the people first stimulating the ampulla of the semicircular canals. But soon after, the as utricle is the main part, the utricular macular stimulation became more popular. And since the 1970s, there have been several studies on utricular macular stimulation by Suzuki, by Fleur, by Curtois, by Goto, and by Mukherjee, and at the end there has been some agreement and on the stimulation of the utricular macula to be more efficient for the vestibular system. And what happens with the Autolit stimulation to restore the vestibulocular reflex? With this, with respect to the relation of vestibulocular reflex, a recent study examining the role of otoliths in adaptation of vestibulocular reflex in animal model shows that otoliths do not contribute to the adaptation of normal angular vestibulocular reflex, but the otoliths provide main cue for the gravity context specific vestibulocular adaptation. That is the key point. So, electrical stimulation of the vestibular nerve by using an otolit stimulation approach has significant functional impact on balance and everyday tasks. And so we can then discuss, can vestibular implants serve for this bilaterally failed cases. Of course, there has been very encouraging and positive responses coming with this project, and the prosthetic electrical stimulation encoding the head motion was found to provide an effective means of restoring the vestibular sensation and alleviating the bilateral vestibular loss symptoms. An analogy can be made with cochlear implants, but of course, the concept is much different because now we need a gyroscope to give the information for the vestibular system, like motion sensors, so that the vestibular nerves can be properly stimulated. So let me pass to the final 4 slides. And so all these researchers stimulated several groups to proceed with some vestibular implant projects. One of them was the group from the University of Washington, led by Rubinstein. And there has been a device counteracting the symptoms evoked by Meniere's disease. And it was almost similar like cochlear implants, but consisting 2 extracochlear reference electrodes and 3 stimulating semicircular canal electrodes. The idea that an intact endolymphatic compartment will increase the likelihood of preserving the residual vestibular function in this group project. And the second report came from Maastricht, and this was the vestibulocochlear. It was called as vestibulocochlear implant, and the electrical stimulation of the ampullary nerve with separate electrodes were the main part of the project. So a cochlear implant was modified and implanted in the vicinity of the afferents of the semicircular canals. The design of this vestibulocochlear implant is also based on commercially available cochlear implants that provides 1 to 3 vestibular electrodes to the semicircular canals together with an intracochlear electrode array. The third one was the multi-channel vestibular implant that came from John Hopkins group by Della Santina, and a built-in gyroscope and accelerometers were capable of sensing and encoding three-dimensional rotations and linear accelerations. So there has been several electrode contacts on the saccule, in the utricule, and also in the posterior semicircular canal. There has been 4 cases reported, and the researchers attempted and partially succeeded in preserving the hearing in 4 patients with bilateral loss of the semicircular canal functions. And the 4th project came from University of Las Palmas. This was the Autolit Implant. Indeed, this has been a nice connection with the previous experiences of autolytic electrical stimulation, and the vestibular responses were captured during acute intraoperative measurements by temporarily inserting up to 3 apical electrodes of a standard cochlear implant in the vestibule. And the reference electrode and a plate electrode or ball electrode was also used. The results showed that the Autolit stimulation with single biphasic pulses evoked the vestibular ECAPs and ocular vamps, which was the main task for the vestibular implantation. So this has been even being quite recent as compared with the others, seems to be the most successful system and mechanism of vestibular implants until now. And with my last slide, I wish to invite you to all you to participate the first vestibular implant and related technologies meeting next week, today, Friday, on April 16. And you can find the announcements and several worldwide announcements has already been done. And of course, this is the first meeting, and free of charge participation. Thank you for your attention, and please let me introduce my gratitude to Federico Di Lela and Angel Ramos Macias and Angel Ramos de Miguel. Thank you.
Bueno, muchas gracias, profesor Nuri. Gracias.
Sensorial stimulus and the audition laboratory. It is my pleasure to greet you again, and I'm really thankful for your participation. It will be a pleasure to hear from you, to hear your presentation on this very important topic. Thank you very much. All right, first and foremost, I would like to thank Federico for his presentation, for his introduction. It's easy to, because Carlos Bocchio is almost like a brother, so it's easy for me to do these presentations side by side with you guys. We've shared a lot of lives together, both professional and personal. So it's truly a pleasure. And regarding Federico, I can say more than you might know. You know, Federico is one of those privileged people who have, at the beginning I said, he has a lot of different properties. He's got Latin America, then Argentina. He's a world-renowned expert, and it's a pleasure to be with you. So I'm now going to talk about electrical simulation and our experience as dealing, which is another extraordinary friend for many years on bilateral stimulation. Everything that will be represented here has been financed by the European Union under a project controlled by the Research European Commission through the research programs developed by the 2020 Horizon, where we have the participation of on the direction of the project other European centers such as Ambeles, the Sapienza University in Rome, as well as our country Navarra, and in cooperation with Cochlear as the research element of it. I'm going to do a slightly different presentation. I'm not going to start with a methodology and whatever. I'm going to instead focus more on trying to understand the phenomena. And I always like to start with gravity. This comes from Newton way back when. Now, I want you to pay attention to something. When we talk about gravity, I want you to pay attention to these gentlemen. These people are in the moon. These people have been professionally trained, have received military training not to fall down, and yet they fall down. That means that they lack the control that we have here on Earth. You know, there's also research conducted on people who have spent hundreds of days in space, and autolytic stimulation has disappeared because it's not being used in space. Please notice how these astronauts walk as they go back to Earth. They have no control over their balance. So what we can see here is also a condition being suffered by our patients, which is why gravity detection will guarantee our optimal growth, our posture, and obviously all of the interactions of the vertical position. So look, this is a cat. This cat has been chemically injured in order to observe the characteristics of bilateral function. Look at the behavior of this animal. It is very strange. And it actually falls down. So this, in humans, manifests differently from what we can see in this picture. And we're going to revisit it further ahead. But this is a topic, this is not a fringe topic in science. Quite the contrary, there is an increasing interest in vestibular implantation. Also, Carlos Bocchio said it. This is a very frequent pathology. It is estimated that in the world there could be more than 1,200,000 people needing access to this treatment. And if we compare that to cochlear implants, which are 50 or 60% of that, then the difference is obvious. And also what happens with age? I want you to notice the studies we have reviewed with Adasia. There is a decrease in afferent elements. There is a reduction of hair cells in macula with age. And based on a study that we conducted with Dr. Fafilo Morela Valencia, we can see how gravity will lead to a decrease in ocular reflex. This starts to give us an idea of autolytic stimulation on this program. So let's take a look at the next chapter. we're going to talk about autolytic electric stimulation. Now, almost all of the groups had worked by producing a fundamental stimulation of the macular envelopes. They focused on simulating this part, but we wanted to focus on this region, the autolytic organ. Why? Because first, it has a very reasonable access for ear, nose, and throat surgeons, and also because we notice its proximity with ganglion cells, which are probably the most important element in simulation in that sense. So we grab this image. In this image, we can see how the autolytic organ region, it is very close to the vestibular nerve where the ganglion is located. This is important to remember because this is the closest area where the neural relations and where this neural interface will be most benefited, which is why if we look at other collaborators who have dedicated much more time to this topic, we can see how people like Kushiro, Forrest Wilson, Kurtovis, or Nicolas Perez, they confirmed that in the case of vestibular stimulating this vestibular nerve could be enough to create an efficient sensation of movement. Of course, we're well aware that autolytic electric stimulation could go through the adaptation of the brain to the base vestibular stimuli, and also the push-pull principle that was mentioned before. But also there are advantages. There is a proximity to ganglion cells. There is an improvement in a neural interface, which is why in our laboratory we have worked on stimulation models that allow for this push-pull to happen within the system. But with current technologies, it is very complicated to get a very specific stimulation to the autolytic organ. So let's take a look at our study. Let's take a look at electric stimulation on the autolytic organ, which is the base of the project. Our base is to analyze the effect of this electric stimulation, this chronic electric stimulation, meaning that the patients, our patients already have an implant, and they have been wearing an implant on a system where you will have a constant pulse stimulation in order to mitigate the lack of balance. For us, we used 100 patients with a bilateral hypoacusia, as defined by the Baranese Society. We used an implant designed by our group in collaboration with Cochlear, which is a system that has vestibulocochlear stimulation by using 3 electrodes of vestibular stimulations, as well as 19 electrodes for the cochlear stimulation. All of these electrodes were manufactured by Cochlear because, again, we worked with them on the electronic modification as well as the concepts of acceleration that we had for the stimulus. So this is the system that we're currently working with. It's a very simple system. There's a method of reference also. It's a cochlear stimulation method, which we all know. And on the other hand, we have a vestibular stimulation system. I'm going to tell you about the second one later on. Let's analyze some of the results that we had in our patients. All of our patients need previous study. We can see an MRI here where we try to analyze the location of the exacular or auricular regions. And in our department, this discussion is for the entire group, we developed vestibular measurement system, which are very useful from the surgical point of view. And also the Navarra group developed a fusion between CT and an MRI, which will give us an idea of the location, in this case, of bilateral dysfunction disease and what was impacted. We also developed, with more of a research view, reconstruction techniques based on 3D technologies and what we've worked on so far. Regarding the focus of the implant, we used a mixed focus, a mixed approach, of the, which is flexible. We can see some surgical anatomy elements that we have to become acquainted with, especially the round window principle and the oval window principle, as well as the disposition of the utricle and the sacula. We can see other pictures where there has been a three-dimensional reconstruction, and once we insert the electrode, we are able to locate it in the reticulosacular region. We can see that in more intensity, in, you know, zoomed in, and we can see the situation of the vestibular electrode in this case and the way it was inserted with our surgery. We left it there for a while, and the guiding principles are very classical in nature. So we have a mastectomy. Well, now it's important to create as much space as possible in this region. We always use fixation systems because we have very different portals where we anchor the electrode bearings, and we analyze the aperture through the round window for the cochlear implant, and also the oval aperture, which is the second one, which we perform with the laser. And then we insert the cochlear implant first, and second, we insert the 3 electrodes that we've already measured for their insertion into the vestibular region, as we have seen. Then we can see the position and the fixing of the insertion, the electrode bearings. Now, this is absolutely important. It is very important to use the vestibular response telemetry, and in some other cases, we have used the pronation of this and intraoperative responses. We can see the first 6 cases here. 4 in our university, 1 in Amberes, and 1 in the University of Pamplona. You can see the location of the cochlear implant as well as the vestibular implant, which is very similar across all our agents. This is a case by Fernanda and Menier. We can see the situation of how all 3 contacts, using the technique that we developed as well as the design of the implant and its operation, we got all of these electrodes to join perfectly on the scarpa ganglion region for its stimulation. And let's take a look at the results of this technique. We've talked about the techniques, the designs, the developments, the patents, etc., etc. Now, currently, we have 6 patients receiving the implant, 4 in our university, 1 in Amberes, another 1 in Pamplona. And there are 2 more that we hope to intervene by the end of this year. We are planning to use the University of Roma, as Barbara said. We're going to talk about the first 4 patients because we have a longer control for them. As we can see, they suffered this bilateral vestibular dysfunction as a result of meningitis in 1, etiology, and COVID. The patients told us about an important decrease in vision too, which made the result of them more relevant. Now, out of these 4 patients, we have a follow-up from 3 to 24 months. The last patient is the one that has more recently started the project with us, and we can see the vestibular response obtained from intraoperational patients. We can see a morphological response very similar to the ganglion response that you get with a cochlear implant. However, it's not as solid, it's not as consistent as we can have, with a cochlear implant. But it is true, and we can see that here, that there is a response that lasts throughout time. It can be maintained throughout time. These are results 3 months into the project following vestibular implant in our patients. Now, to sum up, we can see an improvement in all of the functions we analyze, which is really important because you can't always improve everything. To start, our patients use their vestibular implant as much as they can throughout the day. Now, if we analyze the handicap test, the vertigo test, we can see that there is an improvement at a rate of 37 points. And for those of you who are working in this field, you know that active and that there's an improvement in yes. No, not to worry. Not to worry. Not to worry. I get tons of interruptions at home. Don't worry. So as I said, there was an improvement in all of the tests, as you can see in this image, and our patients use their implants all day long. We can see a summary of these results. We can see a dynamic reps. We can see the pre-op results and how they really improved post-op. And up to a month after the surgery, without reamplification, look, the results continue being very dramatic. There's a dramatic improvement. There is a vast improvement on patient disposition, and the dispersions they had in balance were improved. And even in the last patients, which again has only been wearing the implant for 3 months, you can see the same effects. We can see vast improvements in virtually all of the sensorial limitations they had pre-op. And we can see how patients before implantation, their neurogenic potentials disappeared. And after we implanted and activated the implant, the cervical the potential is neurologically simulated. And there is a recently published work in Frontiers in Etiology by Dr. Ramos de Miguel and Dr. Perez, who analyzed all this situation. We got truly cutting edge research backing up the results. And also there is a residual effect. And unfortunately, patients depend on the implant, meaning that if patients stop using their implants for 24 hours, they revert back to their status before implantation. But there aren't any residual effects beyond 2 hours. On the other hand, we have studied the interactions between the cochlear channels and the vestibular channels. There is no such interaction that you would think existed between channels. There is no clinical affectation, meaning that they will get no noise as a result of vestibular stimulation or vice versa. There are evoked answers suggesting an interaction between cochlear surveillance, but this hasn't been proved. Now, regarding the word tests, the system works very well except on case 3. Because of a meningitis problem that was absolutely unknown to us, there was a magnificent vestibular response, but there's only sound detection. Our patient, 3 months after starting the treatment, have become identical to the normal cochlear implant population, which allows us to say that this patient has had an extraordinary vestibular as well as cochlear results. Now, let's look at the pictures. Let's take a look at the improvements of the quality of life. These are 2 implanted patients, and if you notice, the patient trying to maintain balance, they have to look at their feet, they lose balance, and this one on the left can't even go over a box. Now, this is an implanted patient again, and when they're not using implants, they can't even walk down the stairs. It's very difficult for them. It's very slow, and they need to use the railing. However, when we activated their implant, they can actually go down the stairs. They need no cane, no railing, no nothing. And notice, please, how when the implant is not activated, the patient has to stare at their feet because otherwise they'll fall down. However, with the implant, once it's activated, they need no external support to maintain balance. Now, what happens post-op? Look at the patient which was previously incapable of stepping over the box. This is the same patient and the same activity. Look at that. It's absolutely different, night and day. Or notice patient number 4, 3 months afterwards. This patient has ankylopolitical interpolysis with the visual deficiency as well as Cohen syndrome. Notice the way they walk. It's an efficient way to walk. They have no problem. And if we see, and if we add some difficulty, for example, walk while looking at both the left and the right. See, again, no difficulties, and they're able to walk absolutely normal once the implant has been activated. And this patient, when they came for consultation, they were using a cane. Of course, Life quality is very important. These patients would have never been able to walk down the beach under such complex walking conditions, such as walking on sand. This patient has been wearing an implant for 2 years, and they can walk perfectly on dry sand, which is highly complicated for patients without this implant. So these are the preliminary conclusions. We have observed no adverse effects. All of the patients show an almost normal stability on stable ground. They all stopped using canes, and they can go to supermarkets, they can balance weight, which shows you that the posture and the walking functions showed great improvement when compared with pre-op conditions. And there was a vestibular electrical response that was greatly improved. And all of them wear their implants for 24 hours a day. I would like to thank everyone who worked in this project, the bioengineering department, as well as the surgery unit, and the consortium group also, both in Spain, as well as in Rome and in Paris, the group in Belgium too, our external advisors, such as Rakusin Okuldois, and I would like to join the invitation extended to you by Dr. Nuri to the first Congress, where all of the groups, or most of the groups that have been discussed, will present the results on vestibular stimulation on patients' improvements with bilateral failures, which is one of the fields that could be very interesting for ear, nose, and throat doctors. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Angel. Thank you very much for your consideration towards me. Thank you very much. I'm amazed, you know, and electrical stimulation for vestibular function really does change things when it comes to walking and when it comes to balance on patients suffering from chronic conditions related to the topic of this presentation. Now we'll give the floor to Dr. Angel Ramos de Miguel, the son of Angel Sr. He'll tell us a little bit regarding cochlear implants, as well as what the research looks like regarding the stimulation strategies and the interface strategies particularly. It's a great pleasure, Angel, to have you here. Thank you very much for your participation. The floor is yours. Thank you very much for your introduction. Thank you very much to everyone for inviting me to participate and to tell you the experience with autolytic implants. Well, the good thing about being last is that there's a lot of things that have been said, and I'm going to make the opportunity to tell you some other things. I'm going to tell you about what we've learned and why we decided to undergo this approach and what has happened when we enable the stimulation of these patients. This is terra incognita, you know, it's unexplored territory. So we're gonna discover as we go along. The first question we might have is that when we talk about the internal ear canal, we always talk about semicircular channels. We always remember about the cochlea, but nobody ever remembers the autolytics. What happens if we stimulate them? You know, what do they do? Why would we stimulate them if the semicircular channels are more than enough? Yeah, Dr. Nuri actually told us that autolytics are one of the most important regions when it comes to ear stimulation, and it has a lot of participation regarding the hearing function. It's probably one of the causes that the autolytic organ is less known, and it's more difficult to have the idea to work with it, and once I get the idea, to assess it. So me and Marina did some work about the evolution of the inner ear, and the statocyte could be like the otolite. It came about 700 million years, and from then on, all animals have some variation of this statocyte, and they turned into otolites. And then we started having semicircular channels. Now there's been an improvement of the inner ear, and for example, to the right of the image, we can see that crocodiles, pigeons, or Tyrannosaurus rex, which belong to the same evolutionary line, they look a lot when it comes to inner ear, the only exception being the cochlea, arising 200 million years ago and exclusive to mammals. Now, one of the questions we have is, we call it inner ear, but in reality, it is the inner vestibule, if we're really being accurate. And then we had hearing, and then much later we had the cochlea. Why I said not called inner vestibule? Because as Marina said at the beginning, this is an organ that we know it works only when it stops working. We are only aware that this organ exists when it fails. But as a result of the physiology, we can see some circular channels, the posterior, superior, and lateral channels, 3 channels. At the beginning of our rotation, when we start moving, there's an acceleration, and this will activate the semicircular channels. This is an organ that works in pairs. The left ear and the right ears, one is excited and the other one is inhibited. There is a certain need for both ears, for both organs to work in tandem, even if in opposite directions. And why they work, why the semicircular channels work, they work as a result of the endolimbus simulation, and it will try to maintain the position, and it will pursue there's a giving result to an excitation, the movement. Once the movement is maintained and there are no more accelerations, we can continue turning, but always at the same time, the copula will maintain its position, and that is going to be the next basic condition. We already said the ocular vestibular resolution is that we measure it through the head impulse test. This is the reflex test most widely used to find out lesions in semicircular channels, to find out if the eyes can actually compensate for the cephalic movement or for the head movement. And if there is a compensation, but at the same phase, everything goes right. And if there's a phase shift, then something's wrong. Now, let's go to the Autolytics, my favorite inner ear part. It's made up of 2 macula, the utricule and the saccule. They detect linear acceleration when we go from point A to point B, for example, but they have no rotational components. And each macula, the utricle and the saccule, have components that are excited and inhibited at the same time. If you can see in this picture, you can see the arrows, and we can see how the ciliary cells are positioned in such a way as to correspond to the Creole passage. So when we have an acceleration, depending on the axis where we are, we will have in the same organ a part that is excited and a part that is inhibited. This is an organ that can work in a unilateral way. And if we go back to the evolutionary component, this is a super robust organ, meaning that if we have vestibule problems, we need a bilateral failure. A unilateral lesion not compensated can actually represent problems. And Autolytics, on the other hand, are more robust organs. I'm not going to talk about appends, which could be the classic technique for, which is a standard to assess autolytic function. I'm going to talk about that briefly. And I'm going to talk about what we have today. This is one of the big functions of the Autolytics. It's precisely going where the force of gravity is in order for us to maintain an upright posture. And if we turn our heads to one side or to another, and we leave it distorted during 10 seconds, we will see how the eye will produce a slight torsion. This torsion will cause the retina to position. It will try to correct our torsion. Obviously, there are limits to this. There is a -10-degree margin, but it is proportional to the rotation of the neck or the body regarding gravity. This is a great indication regarding if the Autolytics are working or not. Now, going back to what we've seen, the the VOR, and I'm just using HIT, we've always think that it's about the semicircular channels, but in reality, it has an Autolit component too. If we rotate our heads on the axis of the patients and both Autolites are working correctly, we will see an ocular movement correcting head torsion purely at semicircular channel level. But Autolites, because of the centrifugal force, the force going outside the head, this ear will say, hey, the eye needs to go here, and the other ear will say, this eye needs to go over there. They cancel each other mutually, and so we have a compensation. And if we have a unilateral lesion on a head, for example, from the theoretical point of view, we would be able to see that with both semicircular channels working and eye movement on the semicircular signaling which ear is not working correctly. This is something. These are preliminary findings, but I wanted to show them to you to show you that Autolites participate in a lot of balance functions, and we still have a lot of ground to cover. This is the vestibular nerve innervation picture. I'm going to repeat this image because I know you've seen it before. This is a great approximation. This is a way for us to recover the VOR. We managed to recover it many times. And there is a peripheral part of the vestibular nerve of this carta. Our option was to go through the Autolites first, because we understand that gravity is absolutely fundamental for our balance system, and also because from an anatomical point of view, we're much closer to the ganglion region. We can actually discuss the lateral or horizontal electrode. Well, this is a preliminary approach. Why Autolites? We can see a video of a top turning in one way and a top turning the other way. This is semicircular channel. In this one, we can see that it rotates to the left and it rotates to the right. When in reality, the top is actually turning on the same side, but we don't have any gravity vector. Nothing is telling us if this top is upside down or if it isn't. So that is why semicircular channels appeared later, because we needed to know who's up and who's down. And as it was already said, the cochlear vestibular stimulator was already designed for this project, and this is one of the big advantages. The surgical technique cannot be excessively complex because the vestibular channels make it difficult to reach each of the ampules and to perform an insertion. This was already discussed. This is the way we insert the implants. Now, the intra-op monitoring is absolutely important. It is almost mandatory when it comes to vestibular implants. We have to, on the one hand, we make an insertion of the cochlear guide. We place it where it belongs. We do the transimpedances of the cochlear electrodes, and we perform an e-cap on the cochlear nerve, just like a normal cochlear implant. Then we perform the vestibular guide insertion. We perform the impedances test on all of the electrodes, transimpedances on all of the electrodes, where we find out if the cochlear part and the vestibular part are interacting with one another. And lastly, we perform an e-cap to find out if there's an activity in the vestibular nerve, in order for us to be able to confirm that the electrode is in its place. And much like the cochlear, the insertion of this electrode will not allow you to doubt if it is within the organ or if it is pointing to the module in the vestibular nerve. We don't have that bone structure, that anatomic structure that will be indicated by the guide. And if we look at the impedances of the cochlear electrodes, we can see that the vestibule on 1, 2, and 3 are disconnected because they're not within the patient as of now. Now, let's take a look at the Transimponents Matrix. We discard the first results because they haven't been inserted yet. we perform an NRT, an ECAP. If this was a new cochlear implant, this would be the end of the process. However, we have an extra step. We have a vestibular implant. We can see some impedance activity on the vestibular implant, but we can see that it's working. The impedance matrix, we're still working on it actually because it yields way too much information. And one thing that we see is that the cochlear and vestibular spaces are electrically independent, which is a good point because it means that when we produce vestibular stimulation, we are not going to have a cross stimulation that could result in noise, for example. We monitor the vestibule activity, and one thing we found out is that latencies on the vestibular implant are lower than the latencies at a cochlear level. That's one of the things that we're exploring because the implant continues to believe that that it is a cochlear implant, and we want to be able to find out the entire NRT wave completely. We have 22 electrodes and 19 cochlear electrodes and 3 vestibular electrodes. The cochlear ones are completely normal. And now when it comes to vestibular electrodes, this is a very preliminary phase of the project. We haven't really made changes on the electronic components of the implant. So what we have to do is we have to make the implant believe that it is actually stimulating the cochlea when it is actually stimulating the vestibule through a constant pulse train. We assign a dynamic range of 1 cycle. The sensibility, the microphone sensibility, we turn it up to maximum to give it a more opportunity to be stimulated. And just with that, we have a stimulation that is very similar to pulse train. Professor Osgergen already said it. This is the vestibular implant needs a microphone. The cochlear implant doesn't really need a sensor. There needs to have a constant pulse stimulation, which is oftentimes enough to see benefits. This is one of our success cases. This is one patient where the dynamic posturography was really bad. They needed rails all the time, and with a constant pulse train, we can see how 3 out of the 6 categories the patient showed a normal performance. On the 4th one, almost normal, and on the CTC, there continues to be fall. Why? Because they close their eyes. Now, if we go to the sensory analysis, we can see that the somatosensory is always very good, but the visual was really bad. What was inexistent? The vestibular was very bad. When you turn on the vestibular implant with the pulse train, the visual performance improved a lot. It almost goes back to normal. Why? Because let's remember that the vestibular one was actually just putting in pulses, and this pulse train, we can see that it's we were still dealing with the hypothesis, but we can see that it has an inhibitory effect on the vestibular entrance. What it means is that the balance system, which is made up of vestibular, auditory, and visual pulses, if we're able to cancel the noise, everything else improves, and our patients improve a lot. But at the moment, we have the situation of a turned off implant, so there's not enough benefit. Sensors aren't really mandatory, but they are very beneficial. This residual effect, when we turn up the cochlear implant, a patient is not going to pass a word test. When we turn up the vestibular implant for an hour or 2, they still perceive a lot of great vestibular improvement. So there is a non-residual effect for not for days, but for hours. So we're stimulating the vestibule from the Autolites. We're doing something at a central level, and that's what we want to achieve, and that's what we're working on right now. I'm gonna play this video again because this is a very impactful video, at least for us. This is one of the first patients. He's utterly incapable of going up the step, and it's important for this patient to go up the step, but also he looks more comfortable. And when we activate the vestibular implant, same as before, constant pulse train, cochlear stimulation, vestibular stimulation in tandem. We repeat the test, and he goes up the box with no problem. Actually, it looks like an actor almost. what I love the most about this video is our excitement at the amazing results, because we weren't expecting the results to be this good. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I would like to remind you, as my other colleagues have said before me, I would like to remind you about the vestibular implant and related technologies meeting to be carried out next week, where we will have the participation of Autolytics stimulation teams as well as semicircular channel stimulation teams. So we are in a very nice point in time. You know, there's a lot of things yet to be seen, but we're making breakthrough discoveries, and our patients are showing great performances. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, Angel, for your fantastic presentation and for the very interesting considerations on electrophysiological records about the workings or the stimulation of these systems, the electrical independence and electrical isolation between the vestibules and the cochlea, which is another very interesting thing. Another thing that I think it's very interesting about this presentation is how constant stimulation, you know, with a stimulus we could call let's say a gross stimulus, can achieve for brain plasticity to create no balanced systems where patients achieve an adequate posture and an adequate vestibular function. So it's very interesting, and it's already confirmed in pathology and auditory rehabilitation that a cochlear stimulus is not the be-all end-all. The brain does a lot when it comes to interpreting words and interpreting spatial location. And we can see that in the vestibular system. And the switch off allows, which was one of the questions, allows to maintain vestibular function. So that's fantastic. I would like to thank all of the presentations. We have gone overboard in time, but at least we're going to take a couple of questions. One of the questions that anybody in the panel can answer refers to what type of processor, what type of speech processor have you been using in vestibular and cochlear implants? What type of processors have you used? I can tell that you have used Freedom platforms, but can you tell us more about the processors you used? Yes, it is a Freedom platform. Yes, the only thing we did is we changed the electrode allotment, basically. And in future stages, what's good about the Freedom platform is that it's very well known, it's very stable and very safe. In future interactions, the goal is to change the firmware controlling the processor and the implant in order to have two independent lines, a cochlear one and a vestibular one. And if we have that, I think we'll be able to play more, you know, and examine some variables. Fantastic. Another question relates to the rehabilitation time required by patients to get these amazing responses that you've shown us. How long does it take for a cochlear and a vestibular implant patient to have their functions recovered? Seconds. It's really amazing. You know, the first thing we thought was that they were joking around. You know, they were fooling us. Usually, for cochlear implants, it takes up to 3 to 6 months to see first results. However, with these two implants, the vestibular and the cochlear one, within seconds, within minutes, the patients showed improvements, which means that we need to maybe examine more than just the peripheral organs, because I mean, look at this. Look at the improvement, the radical improvement of a patient who walks in with a cane and lives without a cane, walking normally. In our experience, it has always been the case. And I wanted to add something very important. The relevance of this study is that it's not just one center, it's eight health centers are conducting this research. And what we see in the other 8 centers is the same thing we're seeing. We've given this technology to other centers for them to play around. And to answer the question, there are 2 different cases. The vestibular dysfunction can be very serious in a patient, you know. You could put them on a wheelchair, or it could be not as serious. It could just mean a slight a decrease in the efficiency of their activities. However, when these patients receive the cochlear implant and the vestibular implant and we turn it on, they walk immediately. And then you switch it off, and then you go like, oh my God. And they notice when you turn it on, but not when you turn it off. And this means that there's a time where a patient, for example, the Navarra patient is an alchemist who has climbed Everest, you know, and now that he has both implants, he wants to climb Everest again. We have told him no, but that's the situation we have, you know. I just wanted to add something else, which is something that Marina said in her presentation, right? Daniel Kerman. Fatigue as a result of vestibular function, whether it's total or partial, it's very acute in patients. They tell us that before being stimulated, they have learned to live with them, but they tell us that they are very tired at the end of the day once we stimulate them. Even patients which have a great starting point, all of them tell me that at the end of the day, they're less tired after receiving the vestibular and the cochlear implants, meaning that the extra effort at maintaining balance, all of that neural bandwidth, if you will, is available to perform other tasks. All right, we have no further questions. We have already overshot our time constrictions by 15 minutes. So thank you very much for your participation. You have all been amazing. Thank you very much to the producers of this event for the collaboration and to our attendees. We had literally hundreds of people listening to us. I want to wish you a great weekend and see you next time. Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you very much, everyone. Bye-bye. Thank you very much, Carlos and Federico. Thank you very much, all of you. I will turn on my camera now. And I just want to thank all of you. And I want to just remind you that we'll see you again very soon. Bye-bye.